The big story here is that Matthew's track has shifted, but we're talking about little deviations well within the size of the eye itself and or maybe a little bit more. In other words, the eye's coming towards Jacksonville after it may brush down towards Central Florida, and that's what we were discussing as a potential possibility earlier on. Category 3 right now, likely to become a Category 4, skim right up the coast as a Category 4. This is by Friday at 2 o'clock, right here, 2 in the afternoon. So sometime after around, say, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, we'll finally see the worst of the storm bypass us, fingers crossed, because we want it to go east of Jacksonville. In fact, we'd like it to turn even more so. But the bottom line is, all the things we've talked about, the reasons for the evacuations, the need to pay attention is real. I mean, this thing is going to cause severe damage, especially all along the coastal areas, the barrier islands, and through parts of Flagler, St. John's, Duval. That's Jack's Beach. You're a barrier island. You got to go over on a bridge to get home and back and forth to the downtown. That area there could be severely impacted as the winds really ramp up, the heavy rains, the expected flooding. Rebecca Berry's going to show you in just a few moments just how high that storm surge, literally water rising in from the ocean because of the winds driving it onto the beaches, is the potential for the severe flooding there as well. So again, you're looking at 130-mile-an-hour winds scraping the coast right here, down there towards Volusia County. That means Flagler County really going to be impacted. Hurricane warnings are still in effect for the Bahamas all the way out to the Flagler line. Without a doubt, at 10 p.m. tonight, or 11 o'clock, when the Hurricane Center, let me repeat that, tonight at 11 o'clock, the hurricane warning will be posted for all of Duval County and probably all the way northward into parts of South Georgia, because it will be well within the 36 hours for hurricane force winds to start to impact us. Remember, this has been an amazing model to watch. This is showing you the forecast track of the National Hurricane Center as it's newly adjusted, and it's adjusted closer to the coast, and the forecast model we call the Global Forecast System model. They're right on top of each other now. The Global Forecast System model comes out 3 or 4 hours ahead of the National Hurricane Center official forecast, but as we've seen 3 days in a row now, that track and the original GFS forecast parallel each other, and you can see the blue going right into Central Florida, then right up the beach through Jacksonville. The blue here representing winds over hurricane force. Those are sustained winds, 75 miles an hour. The usual rule of thumb there is 50% more gives you a gust. Your 70-mile-an-hour sustained, that's 100-plus mile-an-hour winds right along the coast, and that'll be all the way through Brunswick, Georgia, and this will take it all the way through 5 a.m. on Saturday morning. So looking at those wind gusts and the details that we'll likely see, this is all the way through Friday evening. This is when the worst of the storm will be. Note the gust of wind closer to about 80 to 90 miles an hour. This is a different forecast model, by the way, but just illustrates the trend here, as even as we go into overnight hours on Friday, the winds from literally I-75, Lake City, yeah, you're on the back edge of this. Columbia County, you're going to get some rain. You're going to see some very terrible winds gusting at times. But as you get progressively closer to McClenny, along I-10 towards Jacksonville, those winds will pick up. The intensity of the rainfall will pick up. The damage will pick up. The power outages will be much more widespread. And by the time we get to 5 a.m. on Saturday morning, the storm will start to move out towards the northeast. Rainfall forecast, I am not as concerned about rainfall because with all the thoughts now settled in, meaning that the track settled in, the intensity of the storm is likely to be at least Category 3 as it rides right by us, that the rainfall should be on the moderate side, which is good news because that'll allow for us not to exacerbate the flooding that we've seen here from some of the downpours in the last 24 hours. The flooding rains have come on shore in that northeasterly wind, and it will just be tacked on by another 5 to 7 inches of rain as we see Matthew go by. This is storm surge potential. Rebecca Berry is going to take you through that now and tell you just exactly why you need to run from the storm because, again, the storm waters will be rising. Rebecca?
We talk about it all the time, but when you're making that decision, whether you stay or whether you go, it should be based on where you live and the storm surge potential for that. And so when we look at storm surge potential, what we're talking about is as this storm is moving up the coast, we now have a forecast model that's able to give us an idea of where we're going to see what sort of storm surge. And along the coastline, it'll be particularly bad, especially for southeastern Georgia in our area, just because of the way the coastline is shaped, as well as the way that the storm is approaching that coastline and the winds. Now, winds travel counterclockwise around low pressure system like hurricanes. And so the storm surge potential leading up to when the eye gets to your area is when we'll see the worst, because the winds right now are coming out of northeast. So we are already seeing tidal high time flooding just because of those northeasterly winds driving a higher volume of water into the St. Johns River. And so as the system approaches you, you'll have those strong northeasterly winds because the air is rotating counterclockwise around this. As the system gets even with you, they become dead easterly winds, just driving more water up along the coastline, driving more water into the inlets, a higher volume of water as that occurs. And so then as the storm passes you, your winds shift around, and that's when the water gets driven away from your coastline, and that's when we'll see relief from the storm surge. But when we're talking about what we can expect with the storm surge, that's when we're looking at this map. So let's go ahead and start in our southernmost counties, and we will work our way north. And so when we're looking at this map, this is showing you the potential for the highest storm surge is this coloring in red right here, right along the coastline, starting in Flagler County and Palm Coast. It does extend beyond the beaches. Now, you have high points, but in general, we are looking for storm surge potential past the coastline here. You can see how far. And when you're talking about marine land, see how the river goes in? We have storm surge potential that's more moderate as opposed to heavy like the red that we're seeing. We have the more moderate storm surge potential along the river there. Now, working our way further inland towards Palatka, now you're talking about the St. Johns River. Think about how the St. Johns River is shaped. It goes in and then down. And so as we've had days and days of northeasterly winds driving more and more water into the river, and that will only intensify as we see this Hurricane Matthew approach us. And so we're seeing light to moderate storm surge potential in Hastings and Palatka and Gopher Ridge there down to Crescent City and Willaca. And so we will see higher than normal high tides in these areas as well. So let's work our way up the coastline here. St. Augustine, notorious for flooding and unfortunately for storm surge. It looks like you've got moderate to heavy potential for that as well, especially right along the beaches. And as that St. Johns River continues through Green Cove Springs, your potential does spread out from the river, especially those low-lying areas, almost all the way out to the World Golf Village when you look at the map. Orange Park right along the river, Julington Creek has issues with the light potential for storm surge as well. And when we work up closer to the inlet, that's when we're talking about more widespread. We're talking about from Little Talbot Island to Atlantic Beach. And so that's what we are looking at with the storm surge potential as it works its way inland all the way to downtown. So as the storm is getting closer to us, those winds will turn more easterly and draw more water into it. The Camden County area and Nassau County area will be particularly susceptible along the St. Mary's River here. We talked about how the worst would be in southeastern Georgia, particularly near Brunswick, because of the way the coastline's shaped. So it's going to get the winds driving more water up against the coastline here because of the way the storm's approaching it, the way the winds are circulating around it, and also the way the coastline shapes. So that's what we're worried about with storm surge potential, and that's why the emergency managers are evacuating by zone. It's a storm surge zone. You should hide from the wind and run from the water. That's the general rule of thumb when we're talking about deciding to evacuate or not.